Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about the Outlaws and the Outcasts. Now, those are two separate groups. Sometimes, I'll get into that. Basically, the Outlaws, back, this is in Victorson County, Texas, back generations ago, when many generations ago, when that area of Texas was first founded, first settled, the original settlers, it was eight married couples basically, and their kids, if they had any, and they came from very wealthy families, and they went and settled that area, and then of course they brought in more people and more people. Now 4 of them were from the really wealthy families. The other 4 were from they were more of staff, okay, and they came there to work the ranches, and of course they had they could do that and then go and buy their own property, save up money and buy their own. And this basically was what happened, and it got, the whole county eventually became a county, lots of towns, and one of the towns was in the north of the county, and is named Bella. Well, by this time, there were other towns that had started up, and they basically didn't have a place to have people who were, the outlaws, the people who were the bad seeds. So Bella kind of made its own little town next to it that they called the Outlaws, and they had prisons, they had brothels, they had bars, hotels, and then eventually there was a train, or maybe it was already there, but train area where they would drop off people, the train station and all this. And eventually that became more of the area as, generations, time went by, where they did, it was separate from the rest of it was part of the county, but it was where all the outlaws, where all the bad people lived. Now, of course, not everybody there was bad, but that was their own town, and they never changed the name of it. They called it the Outlaws. And so that started up. And like I said, it became more of the services and distribution for the county. And the county itself, as it grew, they didn't want to buy anything. They were isolated from other, rather isolated from other towns and cities. And they really didn't, they wanted it that way. They didn't want to, they bought one another's products. Okay, they had an area that had festivals and trades, like farmers markets and such like that. And that's how they wanted to keep it. And they had their own grocery stores. They didn't want chain stores in there, or any kind of businesses. As time went by, they kept it like that. They wanted it to be isolated. They wanted it to be, old-fashioned, really, I guess you could say. And but for some, some things they wanted, they would get through the town called the Outlaws, and they would distribute it to various places in the county. Now, the people who were in the Outlaws, one of the bad things, the people who were kicked out of the rest of the county over time, they could not own property in the rest of the county. And they got kicked out. Nope, no more. They didn't want to have to deal with them, and you're not living within our county. Okay, but it did depend on what was their offense that they got kicked out or put into prison and stuff like that. But as generations went, that was basically it. You're in timeout. They had their, as long as they played within the rules, they did not break the law. They had their own kind of justice system, and they had the enforcement justice system and all that. And basically, they put them in. They weren't exactly jails, but they would go there and they would be isolated from the rest of the county, from their homes, wherever, until they were basically rehabilitated by the enforcement. And if they didn't, they got kicked out of the rest of the county, and they Many of them, they could, of course, go to any place. They could just move out of the county, wherever they wanted to move. And nobody was, everybody had that freedom. But many of them would move to the place called the Outlaws. And they would try to find ways that they could continue to try to be rehabilitated. Some of them did, and some of them didn't. Some of them liked living in that town called the Outlaws. So, I'm reading my notes here. Now, one of the reasons why they kept the name the Outlaws, because many of them, they felt, they'd take votes and stuff, but they felt like it was so historical to change. They wanted to keep it that way. Now, I mean, the history of it was not good, but they saw it with pride. Okay, so, and like I said, of course, we all know, people live in a county and they have children. Not all their children are going to be bad. They might marry somebody that's not bad. So it's not everybody who's bad, but it tends to have more of, people who aren't good, So, and like I said, now it's mainly like distribution and services, and they also do things like that. That's where people go to buy their new cars or their new automobiles. Okay. And overall, people aren't, in the rest of the county, they're not mean people, they're not rude people, but they know the rules. Everybody was raised in that culture. The people who, of course, lived in there, born there, raised there, they understood how things were there and why things were. And it was just became part of their culture, growing up. And they didn't see them as all bad. They know that not all of them are going to be bad. But it just was what it was. And now the town of the Outlaws, they became friendly. They were in the north kind of eastern. I think there's a county on the other side of it, and they became friendly with one that's southwestern in the county, and it was originally called Hippie Town. Well, originally it was kind of more like people lived on the outskirts of a town called Peace, and they just lived on the outskirts. But eventually, the people they came from very wealthy families, and these hippies, they were in university there, and they developed what became known as Hippie Town. Seriously, Hippie Town, and they're friendly with them. They for various reasons. Some of them not so great. So, but that's enough for that part. Now about the outcasts, some of them were born and raised in that town, the Outlaws, and but some of them weren't. Now why they became the outcasts is basically they go back, say, some of them knew one another from childhood, and they became part of a group of people who back then, like say 30, 40 more years, however long, they started getting into computers when it wasn't cool to be in computers, and they're ones that started up, helped to start up what eventually, you think of as the internet or World Wide Web and all this kind of stuff. But they were from before people were really into it, and before it was really developed. And they were part of the group. Now the groups, as time went on, their children became adults. They called them the original group members, and that's what they called them. They labeled them, and they called themselves the 2.0s, and their children the iGen. Okay, it's just something that they did. But anyway, the original group members, they don't call themselves that, but they'll just say, another member, something like that. Now, these outcasts, the original ones, they were part of that group. And that group became, over time, helping one another and everything. They became very wealthy and spread out, over different parts of the state, Texas, and the country, and even different parts of the world. And very wealthy. Okay. So but why they become the outcasts? They became outcasts not only from that group because of what they thought that they could do, but also from the county, from the rest of the county. Now, these are very wealthy county, very wealthy people, very wealthy group, and all that, and have their own enforcement. But these particular people, they eventually called themselves the Outcasts. They were thrown out of the computer group, like I said, the members, and many of them moved to the Outlaws, or if they didn't already live there, and they basically were trying to take over. Now, Paige and Derek, these two people, Paige and Derek, they were basically asked to organize things for the group, and this was many years ago, and it eventually they got so good at it, and it developed. They become very wealthy. Let's just put it that way. Have businesses, so many places, and all. Well, these outlaws, they thought that they wanted to have control. Nobody has control. You know, Paige and Derek, they organize, and Jim, certain things, but everybody's free. Everybody's, has their own rights to do whatever they want, of course. But the outlaws, some of them were outlaws, the outcasts, they really wanted to control it, and of course they wanted all the dividends from all the businesses, and they didn't think that anybody else, but then, they wanted it to be, and to change it into that. Now, the way it is now, everybody who contributes and pays their dues and such from the original group, and then from there even, they get dividends. Some of them get dividends and such because they helped. Now, like I said, and still to this day, the outlaws think, the outcasts think, well, they got with the outlaws, and they think that they can take over. Okay, and they get worse as time goes by. Some of the things they did was that, the actual original group members, the good ones, they started up a social media platform, you could say that, for just the county. They started when they were young, and they eventually built it up and up and up and all that, and became all over. But not all over, but for their own county. But they don't allow the people in the outlaws, the town of the outlaws, and these outcasts to get in. They don't allow them to have access. You have to basically sign up to have access, and they don't let them. Well, the outcasts, they started their own, for their own, that town of the outlaws, and the one hippie town. Okay, they let them, and they don't allow anybody else in. Okay, like, tit for tat. Now the people in hippie town, they can be both. They can, sign up for both of them, both social media platforms. And the outlaws, of course, are wanting to use it. Okay, use that fact. But anyway, the outlaws are really bad. What they try to do is they try to get people in, not the outlaws, well, the outlaws and the outcasts. They try to get people to marry into families of the others, in the county, the ones that can buy property. Nobody, they can buy property. They are descendants of the original group members, and they try to get them to marry into them so they can. They think that somehow, they really think that somehow, some way, they're going to be able to take control, and they're not. So that's enough for this one. I just wanted to get this part out, and we can go from there. Okay.